Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to this day and welcome to our many friends who are on the call. Firstly, and most importantly, thank you for your trust in the Jewish Community Foundation. We appreciate being your go-to source and support for your generous philanthropy. JCF is pleased to share that over the years, we've been the largest grant maker in the region with over 1.6 billion, yes, that's billion, recommended by you, our donor advised fund holders, supporting a myriad of causes. Last year alone, we sent out almost 8,000 individual grants on your behalf, valued at almost $80 million. And today, we're managing over $700 million in assets on behalf of more than 900 individuals, families, and organizations. Thank you so much. As a community foundation operating under Jewish faith-based values, we're committed to building flourishing Jewish communities and advancing sustainable, just, and vibrant societies in San Diego, around the country, in Israel, and across the globe. To accomplish this, JCF is dedicated to providing donor-driven philanthropy, investing, and education, such as today's program, along with our personalized service to help you allocate your charitable resources for maximum benefit in the community. We hope to engage, educate, and inspire you along the way. Now, before we begin today's program, I want to share that here at the Jewish Community Foundation, we read widely about nonprofits, the world of philanthropy, as well as Jewish causes in San Diego and beyond. If you'd like to read over our shoulders and receive a regular email every couple of weeks with our curated selection of the most interesting things we run across, just put your name and email in the chat window and we'll add your name to the list. This is free and open to everybody. Now, before we move on to the program, I want to acknowledge that we could never do any of this work without you. So thank you for attending and sharing this valuable hour, precious time with us as we learn about an important issue in our city. I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Oli Ben, the Jewish Community Foundation's Director of Philanthropy and Social Impact, who will be moderating this expert discussion on homelessness. Before I turn it over to him, I want to let you know that after this discussion, we will be announcing the launch of our giv4, a brand new homelessness initiative that invites everyone in San Diego to participate in helping end homelessness in this region. Please stay tuned for that exciting announcement. And now I hand over to Oli. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. It's great to be moderating this discussion. It's great to see so many people on the call today. I'm not going to do a big introduction where I try to summarize the problem of homelessness in San Diego. We're really just going to jump in with our speakers. And there's a reason for that. We all care about homelessness. We all wish it would end. But then when we start trying to take a deeper look and realize it's super complicated, we get overwhelmed very quickly. And I've personally found that there aren't many good entry points to just introduce these issues and then to figure out how to personally participate and personally make a difference. And so that's what we want to do today. We want to introduce these issues. We want to give you some ideas of where to begin, and then offer one possible solution at the end. And that's why it's my pleasure just to jump right in and introduce two of the leading minds on philanthropy and homelessness in San Diego. Amy Denhart is the director of Funders Together to End Homelessness San Diego, where she supports Funders Together's strategic grant making and advocacy in systems change and permanent housing opportunities to reduce homelessness. Amy has had a really incredible career working as area director for Senator Barbara Boxer, working in the private sector for a community engagement and design firm, working as director of public affairs for a major nonprofit, and serving on a variety of city and regional policy boards. Drew Moser is the executive director of the Lucky Duck Foundation, a foundation 100% focused on alleviating the suffering of people experiencing homelessness in San Diego County. Drew previously served as the executive director of San Diego Sports Association. He has both a BA and an MBA from the University of Redlands. And in scouring your LinkedIn, Drew, I read that while you were playing NCAA basketball in college, your 2005 team set a scoring record for all the NCAA divisions with 132 points per game. I don't really speak basketball, but that sounds really impressive. So Drew, why don't we just start with you? Can you just briefly introduce the Lucky Duck Foundation? And then I'll ask Amy to do the same for Funders Together.
Sure. My name is Drew Moser. I'm the executive director of the Lucky Duck Foundation. First, Ollie, on your basketball comment, we scored that many points because the coach had me pass the ball to everybody else. But no, we are, our mission is to alleviate the suffering of homelessness throughout San Diego. And I tell people, we raise money to fund, activate, and lead high impact programs that make a difference and ideally make an immediate difference. The foundation's been around over 15 years and focused on homelessness since about 2016, when Peter Seidler, the owner of the Padres, and Dan Shea, who's a longtime business leader, teamed up because they saw the issue getting out of hand and far too many people suffering and a lack of leadership and political will. And so they teamed up to determine, to first of all, study the issue, but determine what the private sector could do, and ultimately partnered with Pat and Stephanie, who at that time, Pat and Stephanie Kilkenny started the foundation, and Pat matches all gifts up to $1 million per year. They teamed up and ultimately decided to shift the focus of the foundation to homelessness to fund some of the various things that they were talking about doing. And so the foundation's funded everything from large industrial tent structures that shelter over 500 people very, very quickly, to region-wide employment and job training initiatives, to a food and water program that reaches over 1,000 people per day, and the list goes on. So hopefully that's a high enough overview of who we are, what we do. We don't care about credit. We sincerely care about results and doing everything in our power to try to lead San Diego to best practices in all areas of homelessness. One last quick thing, people often ask or wonder where the name the Lucky Duck Foundation comes from. You can probably guess with the last name of Kilkenny. There's some Irish heritage there. So you got the luck of the Irish, and then Pat Kilkenny is an Oregon boy, grew up there, went to the U of O, then became a major benefactor, and then ultimately the athletic director at the University of Oregon. So he's an Oregon Duck through and through. And his wife, Stephanie, said, we can't just be the Kilkenny Foundation. That's boring. We need to be something a little more creative. And she came up with the Lucky Duck Foundation, Luck of the Irish, the tie with the Oregon Ducks. And our motto is pretty, simple. If you consider yourself to have had some good fortune and luck in your lives, to share that luck with others. And so that's what we do. Pat and Stephanie match all gifts up to $1 million per year. And homelessness is our focus. So hopefully that wasn't TMI, but it's a little bit of who we are and what we do.
That was great. Thank you. And Amy, over to you. Tell us about Funders Together.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. Thank you for inviting me. So Funders Together to End Homelessness San Diego is actually the San Diego affiliate of a national organization. Locally, all of our members are local. We have 15 members who are pooled or aligned, members of Philanthropy, and some of them are family foundations, McCarthy Foundation, Bequest Foundation, et cetera, and some of them are corporate foundations that are actually either state or national, like Kaiser, Wells Fargo. And so Funders Together, as the name implies, we are a collaborative of funders who work together to fund at the systems level to end homelessness in San Diego. We look at longer term solutions to end homelessness long term. So an example of what a systems level fund might be, that kind of investment is we invested in the database system that connects all the providers when that needed to be upgraded. We actually are very proud that we funded the COO position at the regional task force that brought Tamara Kohler to town. The regional task force did not have a lot of funding. There was not a lot of state funding and other funding at the time, about 4 or 5 years ago. So Tamara's recognized as one of the top leaders in the country for building an effective system in San Diego. So and so the other way that we fund is we prioritize at the systems level, and also we only do funding in San Diego County. Our goal is to build a better system, a more robust system for ending homelessness in San Diego County. And we also have certain requirements, such as housing first, which is the concept that you move people into housing as a priority, and then you provide support systems. So it's a low barrier model where you move people into housing with not a lot of barriers to get them into housing, and then you provide social service supports as needed. Some people might just need some rental assistance. Other people need a much higher level of care, like supportive housing or that sort of thing. And so we don't have a lot of requirements, but our requirements are best practices that are recognized at the national level and by HUD and other communities that have been doing this work for years. So the strength of Funders Together is we are a funders collaborative. So we not only have funders who pool their resources to do our grant making, we also have funders who align resources. So we may be doing a grant. In fact, Lucky Duck aligns with us often. And so we may be doing a grant to the community and reach out to our colleagues and others who are learning along with us as to best practices and how to end homelessness. And then those foundations will align directly with our grant making. So our goal is to continue to educate philanthropy on best practices in ending homelessness, and then to make that investment in the community.
And I think that, you know, we set this up as a sort of philosophical difference and philosophical debate between long-term policy change versus sort of immediate action and immediate intervention. But obviously, as your point about the fact that Lucky Duck is an aligned member with Funders Together illustrates, those are not mutually exclusive, and those are often complementary. And so before we dive into a bit more of an exploration of you know, different funding approaches, I thought we should start, and maybe Amy, I'll start with you on this, with an understanding of who the people are, because homelessness is all about the individuals with very different and unique circumstances. But you know, there are some trends and some patterns. So can you maybe, Amy, start by talking about who are the people experiencing homelessness in San Diego County?
Yeah, and I'll try not to be too data heavy when I give you this information. If you need some of the data I'm talking about, you can go to the Regional Task Force website, which, can you put that in the chat, rtfhsd.org, Ollie? Thanks. So in 2020, there were almost 38,000 people in San Diego County that touched the homeless system. And how that's measured is people who were entered into the database, this database that connects the county and the cities and all the providers. So some of those people needed maybe a little bit of prevention, but the majority of those people, like 89% of the people, were actually homeless the night before. So that is a huge number. And when you hear our point in time count, where we say about 7,400 people are unsheltered or are homeless each year, that's a snapshot of one day in time. So that's the difference, in case you're wondering, in case you've heard both of those numbers. So who are these 38,000 people? Actually, about 5,000 of them are children. 13% are children, either living with families or teens living on their own. Another 5,000 are veterans. And about 3,000 are survivors of domestic violence. The type of people you see on the street are what we call people who are chronically homeless. That is not necessarily all of the people who are homeless. There are people who are sleeping in their cars. There are people that are, depending on the definition, people who are just unstably housed. They may be sleeping in a garage or just some place that's just not fit for human habitation. So there are a variety of people who are homeless. The majority is it's an economic reason. People and especially in California, it's because people cannot afford the rent. So there may be something on top of an economic reason. So there may be some sort of a disability, or something like domestic violence or some other tragedy in a person's life that tips them in from housed to unhoused. But it really is an economic issue, which is why when we talk about solving homelessness, we really prioritize housing. And then for the people who need extra support, we support them with the social services or the job training or the other supports that they may need to stabilize their housing. Another note I should talk about in terms of people who are homeless is race. About 6% of people in our county are Black or African American, but about 24% of people experiencing homelessness are Black or African American. And that's incredibly important to think about how that racial bias, how is the system, of homelessness, how racism is inherent in the system, and that overrepresentation of Black people in the system, and how we're addressing that. So another thing about that I thought you might be interested in terms of housing, there was a report that recently came out from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. They do a report every year comparing minimum wage and housing costs. And in San Diego County, a person needs to make $31 per hour to afford a 1-bedroom apartment. So think about how many people who make $31 an hour. So, it really is primarily an economic issue, which is why, like I said, we prioritize housing, and then the other issues that move people from housed to unhoused, we support with supportive services to stabilize.
Great, thank you. And not to jump ahead to the end, but on our giv4.org website, we actually have a whole section on the history of redlining, specifically in San Diego County, which undoubtedly ties into why the Black community is overrepresented in the homeless population. But that's a very helpful understanding of that approach. So, that framework. Thank you, Drew. Do you have any things you wanted to add about who is the homeless population of San Diego?
No, I think that's a pretty good, thorough summary. The only, I think, other food for thought comment I'd throw out is Amy mentioned the chronically homeless, which is largely what's the most visible population. And 50% of chronic homeless or homeless is youth. And so, that's a massive number. If there's 5,000 youth out on the streets, there's one effective youth provider that I think says it so well. We have to catch these kids while the cement is still wet and completely change the trajectory of their lives. If we can't, or if we don't, odds are pretty strong that they will become chronically homeless. So I think, every population, it's key that they're identified and assisted, but youth, especially for the short and long term, benefits or ramifications, however you want to look at, is critical.
No, I think that is, and certainly, there are some of the youth-focused homeless organizations have got good data saying that, if you can turn it around within a year, you're going to have a much higher likelihood of success of preventing those youth from becoming chronically homeless. So that's a very different approach. So a very big picture question. Is it possible to solve homelessness? And Drew, I'll start with you on this one, but how, and is it something that is achievable?
So yeah, I generally consider myself an optimist, and the people in our group and on our board, I think, are optimistic people, but we also acknowledge that the issue will probably never be fully solved. And that's not why the group or Lucky Duck became focused on it. It's really, as Peter says so often, there's nothing perfect in homelessness, but there is best in class. And if we can identify strategies that, are 80% or 90% good, in the business world, you move forward on those decisions because it's a strong likelihood it's going to work. And so, if folks want to argue the 10 or 20%, then they're welcome to. But our view is, if something is going to make a difference and it's going to work now or in the short term, let's move forward with it, with the understanding that, again, nothing is perfect, but there is best in class. And so in so many of the things that we've gotten behind or that we analyze, that's kind of one of the first filters that we'll put it through is, can this make a difference? Can it change lives? Can it meet people now where they're at, and not give them a hand out, but a hand up, to really support their efforts to get off the streets and find that, a healthier and safer and more productive path. So that's kind of our group's view of it. Don't mean to be a pessimist by any means, but it's there again, there's a lot of positives that have happened that continue to happen. And it takes a steady, consistent, laser focused approach to stay the course and keeps onward, and the difference will continue to be made.
Thank you. And maybe if we have time at the end, you could actually talk about some of those best practices you've seen and seen how you can kind of magnify them, because I think that might be interesting to think about it, or to discuss if we have time. Amy, I know you have a specific view on this. How can we end homelessness?
Yeah, I do think we can solve homelessness. In fact, we have actually seen it in other communities. 82 communities in 3 states have actually ended veteran homelessness. And so we've seen it done with veterans, and we can expand it to other populations. There are actually 4 communities as well that have ended both veteran and chronic homelessness. And this doesn't mean that people aren't on the verge of becoming homeless, but what happens in those communities, well, first I want to back up and say, and some people, when I tell them that, say, oh, but we're in California, we're in San Diego. Well, Houston, which is a big city, bigger than San Diego, has actually ended veteran homelessness. And in California, Riverside has ended veteran homelessness. So, it can be done even here in California. So how they've done it, one is a coordinated system where you have somebody who maybe calls 211, is not going to be able to pay their rent, is evicted, whatever. They are moved directly into the system, and they're moved right out of the system. And so they're quickly found a resource. It doesn't mean that nobody's on the verge, none of these veterans on the verge of becoming homeless, but the system is such that it efficiently and effectively moves people and diverts them from becoming homeless and gets them back into housing. And then the other thing is housing. So it doesn't mean we have to, of course, we are under-resourced in housing here in California. We know, in San Diego, city of San Diego alone, we have only built like 10% of the affordable housing units that we're supposed to be building to meet our goals. And so, but there are other ways to get housing. There's shared housing, which Funders Together did a shared housing training for providers. There are lots of 2- and 3-bedroom rentals out there that aren't being utilized by the system. And providers were helping to train them to be able to utilize roommate matching and how to use rental subsidies and some sort of shared housing and that sort of thing. So that's an example of how you can get creative without having enough units. And there are other ways. Sometimes it's just the system itself. You may have in Section 8 alone, a person needs to come up with a down payment to use Section 8. How are you going to come up with $1,200 if you're living on the street for a down payment? And so a flexible subsidy pool, which Funders Together introduced to San Diego, uses some very flexible rent to get people to work with landlords and acquire housing and get people into housing right away. So a coordinated system, prioritizing housing, having the support services for people who need it. Those are all the ways that we solve homelessness. And we have seen it, like I said, in 82 communities.
That's really inspiring. And I know that you're looking to expand that thinking and that model. And I mean, as everyone can hear, like there's so much more to talk about in each of these issues, and this is really just a starting point. And certainly, like I'll encourage you to either reach out to Amy, to Drew, or myself if you want to dive into more of these or into these issues in more depth than we're going to be able to cover today. I also just want to say I see there've been a few questions submitted by the chat and the Q&A. I think Drew actually answered the question about the youth already, so thank you. But feel free to keep submitting those questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. One of the big questions that has come up repeatedly is about the role of government versus the role of philanthropy. This is such a large, affordable housing is just such a, dollar-wise, such a large issue that, philanthropy can't possibly meet that, but then again, the government can't fulfill all the needs as well. So I'm wondering if, and maybe Amy, I'll start with you this time, you can talk about the role of government versus the role of philanthropy, and if you have thoughts specifically about the large $12 billion package that the state recently announced, because I know people have been curious about, well, won't that solve it? So if you want to talk about the role of government versus philanthropy, I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, government, it does fund the lion's share of the response and the solution to homelessness. But philanthropy is incredibly important because of how flexible we can be and how innovative we can be. Government doesn't move very quickly, doesn't necessarily prioritize best practices all the time. And that is a role that philanthropy has played in this field and continues to play. But the government role, so for example, the 82 communities that ended veteran homelessness, the reason it was veterans is because the VA actually invested so much more money and prioritized it over HUD or other government departments. And so that's why it was ended for veteran homelessness first, because of that VA investment. So government is incredibly important, but like I said, philanthropy, we innovate in that way. So right now, the $12 billion that Governor Newsom signed to be spent over 2 years, the majority of that is on housing solutions. That doesn't mean building housing, but it might be rental assistance or other housing solutions. That's about 10 billion of that. One of those projects is called Project Home Key, where we had Project Home Key funds this past year, and that is actually acquiring hotel or motels or other buildings that can be quickly turned into permanent housing. And so with the city of San Diego acquired 2 hotels this past year, and the city council approved those hotels being acquired in October. There were people moving in January. It was incredibly quick. And those people were moving in from the convention center, which was set up as a shelter, you might remember this past year during the pandemic. And so think of an affordable housing development. There's not any affordable housing development I know that can be done in 4 months. So it's a wonderful project. There were some problems, you've seen in the news some problems with the price that they might have spent on the motels, et cetera. But the per unit cost was still significantly lower than new affordable housing, and they moved people quickly into permanent housing. But the role for philanthropy is in the supportive services. There was not enough government funding for the supportive services to keep people stabilized in the housing. So there's some funding for behavioral services, et cetera. But philanthropy can do the evaluation and the data collection to really see how effective the supportive service is. What if people are leaving the permanent housing? Why are they leaving the permanent housing? And to get them to get them back into housing. So that's an excellent role of philanthropy. Another role of philanthropy is maintaining public confidence. So we've all heard of NIMBYism, and some of the home key projects this past year, unfortunately, died because people in the community didn't want permanent supportive housing for people who are homeless in their neighborhood. And so educating the public about the effectiveness of affordable housing and stabilizing people who are homeless into being housed. Funders Together is actually in month 4 of a 5-month campaign to change the narrative and to educate the public about housing as an effective solution for homelessness. So those are just a couple examples of how philanthropy really does play an important role.
Thank you. Drew?
Yeah, I'll give a couple examples of, I think, where Lucky Duck has kind of viewed our role and how that matches up or supports or hopefully accelerates the government's role. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, we polled San Diego voters on all things homelessness. It's one of our deals. We want to follow the facts to guide decision making. As we know of, there's government properties that are underutilized, that sit vacant with their doorsteps, with the front door locked, and homeless individuals literally sleeping on their doorstep. And we said, hey, why don't we open some of these properties that exist to get people out of harm's way right now, immediately? There's far too many people on the streets. Is it a permanent strategy or solution? No. Is it a better one and out of harm's way and on a path to something brighter? Absolutely. But we didn't want to assume that was the right perspective. So we polled registered voters, and there were several takeaways. The key ones were well over 80%. So the city and the county need to play a major role addressing the issue. We asked about, okay, what about vacant buildings? 84% said the city should open and activate vacant, underutilized property to serve as inclement weather shelter. And so for us, those were overwhelming results that not just us, but the public at large believes that it's a government issue, and largely in that they need to be held accountable and take action. Where we've had some luck is you look at a place like Golden Hall, city-owned property right next to City Hall, that for the longest time the city came up with just about every excuse in the book for why it could not be used to shelter people. It ultimately, I think, with some of the influence our group was able to provide, they finally opened it and added, I want to say, 140 shelter beds to start. The place is massive. You put many, many more beds in there. So that was a good start. And since then, since the convention center closed, there's now over 500 beds in that city property. So that's, I think, and we talk about, Amy was talking about home key, and yeah, we believe in housing first, and permanent housing. That's a key piece in this whole puzzle. There's the timing factor, but then there's also the cost. The hotel units, I think, average out to around $300,000 per unit or per bed. When you look at what it costs to transform Golden Hall, it was like less than $5,000 per bed. And so for every person that moves into a home key unit, you can take off, what's the math on that, 24, 60 people straight into shelter. Same thing with the bridge shelters that we were able to fund, which again took a lot of pushing on the political leadership to take action. And ultimately we were able to purchase and install those bridge shelters. Those were done for under $10,000 per bed. And so it's not only a cost-effective strategy, but it's a humane way to get people off the streets. And is it housing? Is it long-term? No, it's bridge shelter. It's a bridge to something better, something more long-term. So I think, to Amy's point, the two go hand in hand. If the politicians do something that's productive, we'll be the first ones there, applauding them and patting them on the back. If it's a situation where we think they need to take more action, the pat on the back will be lower and swifter, as we really view our job as holding them accountable and trying to hold their feet to the fire the best they can. And that's one thing our group is committed to doing, is to survive generations of politicians, to stay the course and steadfast on this issue, to help as many people in need as quickly as possible. And home key I think is proven to be a pretty solid strategy. And Amy mentioned on how quick it is. That's great. Can it stay at that pace? I don't know. That remains to be seen. And that's largely where the state dollars will be going. But again, the two kind of are a yin and yang. They got to push on each other. But I like to think we squeeze every last penny out of every last dollar. I don't know any politicians that can look you square in the eye and say that about what they do with their resources, but I feel confidently that I can with what we're able to do with ours, along with working alongside them to collaborate with them or hold them accountable when necessary.
Thank you. And I think in that answer, we teased out both where the alignment is and where some of the philosophical differences are. And as I've said, I mean, in the time we're given, like this is barely scratching the surface. So I want to to say that we could go so much deeper into so many of these topics, but unfortunately for time reasons, we're actually going to sort of move on, but I'll say there's going to be lots of time at the end for questions. So I want to switch gears now, actually, and say that often when you attend a session like this, you're left with some thought-provoking takeaways, and you have a better understanding of the scope of the problem, but it's hard to know exactly what action to take next. And this session isn't going to end like that. We actually want to offer you an approach today to addressing homelessness with your philanthropy that marries together the strategies that Amy and Drew just described. This new initiative of JCF called giv4 is certainly not the only way to address homelessness. And some people will be inspired to focus on one organization or one strategy, like Lucky Duck Foundation's immediate needs strategy or long-term change. But for the many people who are just beginning to learn about these issues in more depth, or who care about the issue of homelessness but don't yet know where to focus their philanthropy, or for people who would like the benefit of the expertise of Drew's organization and Amy's organization, helping them figure out where to give, giv4 might be a good option for you. So let's start by taking a look at our video. It's coming.
Helping.
Having our money make a difference for San Diego.
Having real impact.
It's not easy to figure out what to do or where to begin.
How can I really make a difference?
Until now, it's been difficult for individuals to make a meaningful difference on big issues like homelessness here in San Diego. That's why we've created giv4, to make it easier to tackle big local challenges with one donation. We've carefully curated 12 nonprofits working to end homelessness in San Diego. Each month, you'll see the impact you've made for a different organization taking on a different aspect of homelessness. We believe in the power of every individual to make a difference, but that when we come together, we can change the world.
Give for yourself.
Give for your community.
Give for the cause you care about.
Give for homelessness in San Diego.
So let me just change my screen really quick. Man. The joys of Zoom. All right. So as we discussed in that video, or as we showed in that video, the giv4 Homelessness in San Diego Fund is an expert curated fund of 12 nonprofits, each working to tackle a different, or to take on a different aspect of homelessness. We've curated that fund of 12 organizations. We make it super easy to give to that fund, and you can see the impact each and every month with the story of one of those 12 nonprofits. So let's just dive in a little bit more depth. The fund was curated by the homelessness experts who you heard from today. They're representatives of the Lucky Duck Foundation, Funders Together to End Homelessness. And it was very important to consult with people with lived experience of homelessness to make sure that we were being representative and making sure that the fund actually incorporated different perspectives. And I'd like to talk just really quickly about the curation process as well. These organizations, all of the organizations in the giv4 Homelessness Fund had to be recent grantees of Funders Together or the Lucky Duck Foundation, because that provided a first layer of vetting and due diligence. They also had to conform to a variety of best practices for nonprofits generally, and homelessness best practices specifically. They then had to apply and go through JCF's application process. So this is a heavily vetted and curated list of organizations. So we ended up with 12 organizations in the fund. It's all one fund, but conceptually we divided it between prevention of homelessness, intervention or immediate needs, which Drew talked heavily about, and systems change, which is the area that Amy talked heavily about. And the point of this list is that these are 12 organizations that are all doing great work, and each one is taking on homelessness from a different perspective and can tell a different story. Some you'll be familiar with, like YWCA's Becky House or Serving Seniors, but you may be less familiar with YIGB, which is building modular housing on the acres of unused and underused church property in the county, or the HEAL Network, which seeks to ensure that the voices of people who've experienced homelessness are considered on every policy-making body in the county. And that's really the point, which is that as much as giv4 is about raising the funds to take on homelessness, it's also about telling the stories and building your understanding of these difficult issues. So when you donate to the giv4 fund, each month you're going to get a 1-minute video that we're producing with a different nonprofit from the fund, so that over time you'll build up your awareness around, say, the fact that 25% of people experiencing homelessness are over 55, and what you can do about that. Or the overrepresentation of LGBTQ youth, or as Amy talked about, the massive overrepresentation of Black Americans in the homeless population. So we'd really love you to give to the giv4 Homelessness Fund, but what we really hope is that you'll be inspired by 1 or 2 of the nonprofits in the fund in particular that you discover, and want to connect with them and help them and build a relationship with them specifically. And as I'll talk with giv4, because we're really uniquely positioned as a community foundation to help create those relationships. And that's something that we're really committed to doing. So you can, for more information, you can go to and visit our giv4 Homelessness in San Diego website, which is just at giv4.org. And I think Charlene will put that link in the chat. And you can learn about the 12 organizations who are part of the fund. There'll be a little video there, some information about their unique approaches, and also if they're looking for volunteers or board members or other forms of help. So you'll get profiles of the 12 organizations. We've also put a lot of energy and invested a lot of time in putting together under the Learning tab some really cool resources. We mentioned before that there's a whole section in here about redlining and the impacts, and redlining specifically in San Diego and its impact on homelessness long term. Because we want you to learn, and we want you to be able to grapple with these issues and learn more. And then if you're interested in giving, and click on the Donate Now button, there are lots of different ways to give. And because we have a lot of JCF donor advised fund holders on the call, I'll just share that if you click on the fund holder button, you'll see a form that looks very similar to the form you're used to within our own online JCF Connect granting system. So you can fill out that form on the giv4.org website, or you can go to JCF Connect, or if you normally speak to somebody about your granting, feel free to reach out to them and make a grant as you typically would. If you're not a fund holder and you'd like to donate online, there's a big button to do that. And from there, you'll be taken to our Give Butter page, which is very similar to GoFundMe. And just a couple of things to share from here. First, this fundraising number is incorrect. We actually need to add a few gifts. We've actually raised close to $57,000 already. And today's actually only the official launch of giv4. So we're really happy, and thank you to, I see some of the donors are actually on the call today. So thank you so much to them. And thank you for your consideration. And secondly, if you're donating online like this rather than with a DAF or stock, we're really trying to ask people to give monthly donations and of any size. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward, which is we'd like to keep telling the stories of the 12 nonprofits over time, introducing one a month, and really getting donors engaged with these issues. And we think the best way to do that is for people to sign up for a monthly, it's a sign up monthly. If you give via DAF or stock gifts, those will be considered a 12-month gift unless you tell us otherwise. So just to end, I just wanted to talk about why JCF launched giv4. And first, it's just a large part of our responsibility as a community foundation with $700 million in assets under management. A major part of our mission and vision is a sustainable, just, and vibrant San Diego society for all of San Diego. And so we have to do everything we can to work towards that vision. Secondly, having facilitated over $1.6 billion in grants over the last half century, as Charlene mentioned, we think we are in a special position to be able to bring the community together, to connect individuals and nonprofits, and to leverage our relationships to educate, inspire, and facilitate philanthropy and homelessness. And largely, this is such a large issue, it really requires everyone to participate. That may mean giving, that may mean volunteering, that may mean advocacy and contacting your representatives. And on that last point, we're asking everyone to think about giv4 not just as a potential donation by themselves, but really a solution that they can let their friends and colleagues know about too. Our vision is that giv4 becomes a platform for everyone to participate in the solutions to homelessness. So please think about how you can spread the word too. We have some time for questions now, and I see some have been coming in. But the links to giv4 are in the chat. We'll also send out an email later on with the information for giv4, for Lucky Duck Foundation, for Funders Together after the presentation. And lastly, before I turn it over to questions, I just do want to personally thank Amy and Drew, because they've been incredible support. They've really helped move this project forwards, while also simultaneously trying to achieve their own fundraising and their own organizational goals. So thank you so much for your help and your support with this. We're really grateful that you've been such wonderful participants. So thank you. So I think we have some questions.
Yes, we do, Ollie. The first question, I think we'll do it because you've just been speaking about it, is how will JCF divide the dollars donated by the individual donors, and who gets to decide how to allocate those funds among the 12 organizations raised within the giv4 product?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And the answer is, at first, we are keeping this very simple and straightforward, which is that each of the organizations is going to get one equal share, so 1/12 of the money raised. That is for a couple of reasons. First of all, at this size, it seems the equitable thing to do. And the money's been given for general operating support because these organizations have all been so heavily vetted. At a certain size, which we're not at yet, we would start thinking about whether giv4 would become too big of a line item of any one organization's budgets. And I've actually talked about that with our panelists today. And that seems to be the right solution at a certain size. But at this point, we're going to be dividing the money equally.
Thank you. And the next question is for Drew. How many resources or how much do you devote toward keeping people from becoming homeless versus serving people who are already homeless? The whole intervention and prevention question. And how do you decide how to allocate those resources to one or the other?
So if I'm hearing it correctly, it's how much are we allocating towards prevention versus folks that are on the street or already homeless. And the lion's share of what we do is helping folks in need in their homelessness. We've done a few things here and there with prevention. It can be more challenging to identify those folks. To go in a little bit more detail of just a few quick examples of how we're helping or how we've helped folks that are homeless. I mentioned the bridge shelters. That was over 500 beds, damn near overnight. We have a region-wide employment and job training initiative, more than a dozen different programs we've been able to fund that either provide folks with training or equip them, connect them to employment opportunities, from culinary training to food rescue, community beautification, and so on. And that's well over 750 participants have been able to go through that, all those different programs that exist out there. Our food and water initiative reaches people living unsheltered. It was launched in response to COVID. We partner with around 30 different outreach teams who distribute meals to over 1,000 people per day. We've done over 750,000 meals to date. The two primary objectives with that is of course keep people fed and hydrated, but secondarily use those meals as a relationship builder, trust builder, to ultimately help connect them to the resources that exist to help end their homelessness. So those are just a few quick examples, but again, the lion's share of what we do is folks who are currently homeless. And for us, it's got to be, a cost-effective, based on the facts program that has proven results. So that again, when we deploy money, we have to be, certain, damn near as certain as we can be, that it's going to make an impact. So hopefully that's helpful.
Great. The next question I'm going to direct towards Amy, but of course I think you both might be able to answer this in some way. The question is, what is the most needed social service by this population, and how open are they to receiving this additional help beyond the initial housing? And as a follow-up, and perhaps you could just take a minute to address, what are the biggest challenges that you may face serving this particular population? We'll start with Amy and take a couple of minutes. So, what are the most needed social services? Are people amicable to receiving them once they are put into some temporary or long-term housing? And what are your greatest challenges that you face serving the population? The 3 parts.
Yeah, so in terms of the social services, so once people are housed, I think is what the question's implying, because once people are housed, then we need services to keep them housed. So some people do just need rental assistance, and they just need some sort of a subsidy. It's purely economic. If they do need social services, 69% of the people who have touched our homeless system are disabled. That could be physically or mentally, have a mental illness or physical disability. And so much of it is healthcare. There's a huge tie between healthcare and housing and homelessness. And so, anecdotally, the people who've become friends of mine who were formerly homeless, mostly it is some sort of a healthcare issue where they couldn't afford the healthcare. I have one friend who is actually, in order to pay his health insurance every month to keep his health insurance, because he had some he needed to maintain it because he had a lot of health issues. He was actually living in the park in Escondido because he couldn't afford rent and to pay his health insurance at the same time. So often it's, physical health and mental health that are some of the biggest problems. And then in terms of people, in terms of people willingness to receive help, once people have sought shelter and permanent supportive housing, that's something that they've sought out. So once they're in the housing, there is a high success rate of people maintaining that housing in permanent supportive housing. So it's like something like a 97% success rate in maintaining that housing.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. And I suppose that comes to, as a follow-up then, this with the housing first model, that works well for people experiencing homelessness, but how do you navigate those that need or have severe mental illnesses? What I'm hearing you say is that there's a huge success rate because once they feel stable, they're then more open to receiving those services. Is that an appropriate outcome that you think once they're in, you can help them? Because those with severe mental illnesses, do they not need something beyond the housing first model?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And the housing they're matched to meets what their needs are. So for example, if somebody goes to a provider and their needs are just rental assistance, they'll get rapid rehousing, which is just kind of a rental subsidy with some supports. If somebody has a much higher need for supports, they will get what's called permanent supportive housing, which is full wraparound supportive services. And so we try to match the person with the resource.
Great. Ollie, the next question, I think in the last one we have on board here until anybody enters some more, it has to do with, the question first was, are these 2 organizations represented in the Give4 program that you donate to? And if not, why not? And with that, you already mentioned that you have considered these 12 organizations in Give4 to be best in class. And how does that work with these 2 organizations as an overlay to that? So there's 12 organizations, but not necessarily these 2. And the question is, are these 2 organizations going to be receiving any of the money?
So the short answer to that was we didn't want to create a conflict and have them picking themselves. And so, and additionally, I mean, Funders Together doesn't really, isn't doing its own independent fund or isn't doing direct service work themselves. But certainly the bigger point of sort of these organizations, I mean, certainly like they are considered to be doing incredibly good work in these areas. That's not to say that they are the only organizations, and frankly, some really well-qualified, excellent organizations just weren't able to be fit into the Give4 fund for space reasons. So the short answer is not every good organization could be fit into this fund. This is trying to tell stories. This fund is trying to increase awareness. It's trying to support some really, really good organizations. and over time we'll reconsider which organizations we want to add to the fund. But not everyone that was, there are more good organizations than there was space in a fund of this type. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. And that was the last question.
Great. Okay, so I guess I'll wrap up, which is just to say thank you to Drew Moser from the Lucky Duck Foundation, Amy Denhart from Funders Together to End Homelessness. Thank you to everyone who's already contributed. We will send out materials relating to everything we discussed today after the call and a recording as well. And we really look forward to everyone's continued participation in these issues, whether through one of the solutions we mentioned or something else or a different solution. So thank you so much. And we'll talk to you. We'll see you all soon.